showing 101, and welcome everyone to the March board meeting. Wanted to begin with our land acknowledgement, and wanted to also state that it's now the beginning of springtime, and so all of our roots and berries and birds and food sources are starting to grow and gather. It's time for us to start gathering. So I wanted to let everyone know that North Central Washington is on the ancestral grounds of the Confederate Tribes of the Colville Reservation, and all 12 tribes have used this land for all times. So welcome them and welcome you all to this land. Wanted to also do a little bit of Zoom etiquette. I'm sorry if I have a bit of a sunshine on my face, so I do apologize for that. But I wanted to ask you to leave your cameras on so that we can see everyone. We're still getting used to this Zoom world where we try to be face-to-face as much as possible. So if you could do that. Also, if you have a declaration of conflict, this would be your time to go ahead and do that. I know that as the meeting goes along, you may find that you feel like it's a conflict of interest, and I do ask that you immediately put that into the chat so that we know and can acknowledge that, that there's a conflict. Next is the board roll call. Since we started with not all present, I will do this. If you're not present, then I will come back around. So Carleen Anders, are you present? Kathy?
I'm here.
Okay. Deb Murphy?
Here.
Thank you. Jesus Hernandez?
Here.
Ken Sterner?
Here.
Ray Eichmeyer? Rebecca Davenport? Rosalinda Kibbe?
Here.
Thank you. Senator Warnick? May be absent. Dr. Michael Tuggy? Kat Letette? I think I'm saying that right. Nancy Spurgeon?
Here.
Thank you.
Hi, Kat's here as well. Sorry, I was slow to get off mute.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. Carleen Anders. This time I'll call her absent. We'll watch for her. Dell Anderson had let us prior know that he would be absent. Ramona Hicks also let us know that she would be absent today and sent a proxy for her vote. So I appreciate that. Ray Eichmeyer. Rebecca Davenport. And Senator Warnick. Dr. Tuggy. All right. That is our roll call. At this time also, we have some space for public comment. Is there any of our guests who have a public comment to make? You can either put it into the chat box or unmute yourself. Also, any of our guests, if you could put your name and organization into the chat so that we can do a sort of roll call on who's present. And with that, I would ask that you bring up the consent agenda. And everyone got that in their packet. It includes the agenda, acronyms, and decision funds flow chart, and the minutes from the meeting, the February 7th meeting.
Molly, as you're scrolling through that, I just wanted to note that Dr. Tuggy has joined. I saw him on there.
Thank you so much.
Yep, I'm done.
Peggy.
And all guests, thank you. You're already just jumping on, putting your name and organization in the chat.
Thank you. I will also be looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda today.
Molly, I so moved.
Thank you, Rosalinda. Do I have a second on that?
Second,
Any questions, any comments before we go to a vote? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Opposed would be nay. Abstain. All right, ayes have it and motion carried. Thank you, everyone. At this time, I'll welcome John, the Executive Director, for his report. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for joining again this month. And again, thank you to everyone not on the board who jumps in and joins. We always appreciate hearing and listening to our partners. So it is always great to see everyone joining these calls. If you go on to the next slide, just some quick updates at the state level. As you know, obviously Senator Warnick is not here today. Most likely she is tied into legislative work right now. But one major thing, obviously statewide, that is going to be coming down the pike here pretty soon is public comment and gathering comment for the upcoming Medicaid Transformation Project renewal that is to be submitted in July of this year. So I was just on a call with the Healthcare Authority today. Public comment opens up April 15th of this year, and I have a link there and I'll dump it in the chat when I get a moment about the announcement of the public comment period. It also has a few attachments that help explain a little bit of the Medicaid Transformation Project renewal. Thank you, Wendy. You're already on top of it. What I'm putting up here on the slide is the ultimate goals of the waiver renewal and the key focus points of the waiver renewal. I think some key things to call out that you'll see have been really highlighted from the last 5 years is specifically clinical integration, community-based care coordination, and continuing to refine and focus that work. And then also the specific emphasis in health-related social needs for things that more closely align with the social determinants of health. I think one of the key things we've learned, again, over the last 5 years, and that, has been generally known, is that a lot of this work on healthcare improvement and health improvement is really occurring outside of the clinical walls. And so how is integration, how is care coordination, and how is addressing the health-related social needs going to impact it? The Healthcare Authority is going to be working with the ACHs to collect and outreach for public comment. A few key things I would probably bring up, and we'll see a little bit more over the next month or two, is that at this current juncture, they're looking for specific questions and feedback. And so they'll have some more targeted questions that they're looking at as a whole. And when I get that information, I'll share that all with the governing board as well. The other thing I think you're going to see a little bit too in this upcoming waiver renewal is that it's more targeted and it seems a little bit smaller than the district program. And that's, because of two things. One, the Healthcare Authority has learned a lot over this last waiver that they're using to refine and focus on what they want to achieve over the next 5 years. And the second really is, the delivery system reform payment was a major waiver renewal with a lot of dollars attached. And that's just not going to come into existence over the next 5 years. It's going to be a smaller amount of money that goes into the renewal, and it's going to be a more targeted, focused approach. For us, and what I would emphasize as an ACH for our region, is that we're always going to look at this as, a book of business that we do in partnership with the state that influences our overall mission and vision. And so we will figure out and we will always work to see how this best aligns with the work that we are doing and implement it in that way. And we will be working with the state and other ACHs to do that. If you go on to the next slide. So switching, that's the key focus on the state, but switching some focus on some of our regional and partner work. One thing I just want to call out and give a huge shout out to Wendy for is she has started the Behavioral Health Learning Series, and we have had our first in-person event since COVID-19 has begun very successfully last Wednesday at the CTC Center. And Wendy, do you know how many people were in attendance there?
If I remember correctly, counting the 2 consultants and myself, we had 43.
So overall, there's been about 71 unique participants, 42 organizations, 11 sectors, and 3 parent advocates. And, I would focus on, the 11 sector and 3 parent advocate component of it. 'Cause I think one thing that Wendy and our consultants and the team has done very, very well at this year is really getting out there and engaging partners that traditionally aren't in the table, and that includes parent advocates. So we have a good mix of, the direct service providers and the community organizations and the advocates coming together to discuss and look at ways that we can work and improve the behavioral health system. One thing I think that does do is, and one thing that we've been working on is taking an initial step to focus on that purpose and come together as a group to define that purpose and then define the outcomes moving forward. For a lot of our behavioral health partners who've been doing this for a while, we're asking them a little bit to slow down for a second while we bring in more community members and more advocates so that we can all get centered and drive together in this work. For those who are new, they're getting up to speed and they're getting caught up on this work. And so the next meeting is tomorrow online from 12 to 1:30. And you can go to our calendar if you are interested in finding the link to get access to that meeting. The other thing I want to call out is, again, our NCACH monthly partner convenings. Our next meeting is March 22nd from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. A few quick things I just want to note on the partner convenings. One, in your meeting request as board members for today, you have a link for all of the registrations to all of the meetings for all of the year. So I actually encourage everyone to get into that meeting request and register for all of the meetings. There may be times you can't attend, you may be on vacation, and just like I tell staff, we're on vacation. I expect everyone to be on vacation, but it's really important to get that on your calendar as soon as possible, just so that you have it there, so that you know that you can attend those meetings. And so we are taking registration instead of embedding it on people's calendars because it is open to a broader group of people. So by the sheer fact that if we just invite people to attend, we're limiting it to the individuals we know. We want to really create it in a way that anyone in our region who is interested in engaging in the mission and the vision of NCACH has an opportunity to join and be part of that convening. Just a quick call out, in the February convening, we introduced Thriving Together as a bridging framework. And I believe this was introduced in our board a little bit here and there as we've looked at the different models. Thriving is a framework that we look at specific vital conditions and specific aspects of well-being that really look at how we move from being, a system that addresses those conditions to a system that supports a region to be thriving. I'm a little vague today and I apologize for that, but we will be bringing more, and you'll see more of that framework and information coming to the board over the next few months. Tyler Norris from the Wellbeing Trust did a great job nationally speaking to thriving and to well-being. And then I want to give a call out to Dwayne Duncan from the Center for Drug and Alcohol Treatment, who came and spoke specifically how the center has looked broader beyond their organization to address whole person health and well-being in connection with other clinical partners in the region. Coming up in March, we are actually going to have an emphasis on networks, relationships, and multi-sector partnerships. So we're going to have Danielle Varda from Visible Networks Lab attending, as well, sharing from the national perspective on the importance of networking and how we can build networks and network science into the work that we're doing. So again, I encourage you, the links are in your meeting request to join. For those of you, yes, we will post that also on the meeting request. So I wanted to say, for those of you individuals who aren't board members, you don't have it embedded into the meeting request, it is also on our calendars page on the NCACH.org website. Lastly, the other thing I wanted to mention is that we had an opportunity to have, I'm going to actually ask Wendy to pronounce the doctor's name. It's Dr. because I'm going to get it wrong.
I'll get it wrong too, but it's Dr. Kira Mouseth, I think, Mauseth, from Department of Health, Behavioral Health Strike Team.
Yep. Well, thank you for getting it wrong. Instead of, I should have just bitten the bullet on that one. And she is going to be talking about behavioral health impacts of COVID-19 specifically. And she also is doing work, I believe, with individuals in Ukraine. So she's going to also bring in some of the recent Ukraine war impacts as well. She has a particular focus, I believe, in youth and has done some work in youth. And she has been doing a lot of research on recovery and resilience after major disasters. And so she is going to bring a great wealth of knowledge. And I think I need a shout out to Kathy Moret, who's been sharing this around the ESDs. So we have 50+ individuals already registered to attend the training webinar. And again, if you know individuals you think who would find value in this, please share this around and get it out there. We can have right now at least 500 people on our Zoom webinar, and if we need to, we can expand it to be bigger. I would love to have Wendy come tell me that we need to have more than 500 seats on our webinar. And then if you go to the last slide, just a few quick operational updates. We are still, you did not see January financial statements in the board packet. We are working with Clifton Larson Allen to finalize a view on the financial statements, and they plan to have them completed by the April meeting. So at the April board meeting, we'll be presenting new financial statements for this year. We will also have Sarah Krowski and Kristen Solberg from Clifton Larson Allen join us, so you have a chance to meet our accounting team that is working behind the scenes on this stuff. I am still encouraging, I have been meeting one-on-one with board members. If I haven't had a chance to schedule a time or meet with you, I encourage you, I will be reaching out again for those board members I have left to touch base on. I'm going to be reaching out to you to find a time. I'm really just, I know I've been around for 5 years, but I've told every board member, I'm acting like a new ED for a few months. I really want to learn from you guys how you see the vision and the work of NCACH going, and just want to take some time to learn and grow in that retrospect with you guys. One thing I've heard from a few board members is that they're continually wanting to learn and hear more about the impact NCACH has on our community. And so luckily, this was not planned, so I can't take any credit for it. Luckily, today we'll be sharing some examples of NCACH impact on our community through ripples effect mapping and what Wendy will be doing with some of the WPCC deep dive. One thing I wanted to call out, just tied to the equity training that Deb Murphy and I are going through. I just wanted to note, Deb and I have had a few conversations, and a book or a reading that has come up in those conversations has been Wenatchee's Dark Past, which talks about some of the history of minorities in our community, and a lot of the historical facts that go on with that. And so I actually want to encourage everyone to look up the book and potentially consider reading the book. It's a pretty short read, and Deb can attest to this, and I'll probably make her speak in a second. but it really gives a good historical context of some of the things that have happened in our valley. And for everyone, no matter, what side you are on the debate, it just gives a good centering or grounding about it. Deb, do you want to provide a comment or two?
I think it will give everybody a different perspective. Some people have lived here for areas in this entire Eastern Washington area and not had any idea of some of the background historical perspective. So the gal who wrote the book, there's a lot of footnotes. So the book looks thicker than what it is, and you can actually get it off of Amazon is another resource. But it gives you a really good perspective of maybe why people do things, the reasons behind it, and just how laws were put into place. And some things are still on the books and some things aren't. Anyway, I just suggest, it's a short read. I just suggest everybody read it to gain your own perspective. And then maybe we can follow up with a different conversation at a later date. But she did a really good job on the book. Worth your time.
John, can you mention the title of the book and the author one more time, please?
It's Wenatchee's Dark Past. I'm gonna have to look up the author again. Unless Deb, you have it handy. Well, I will put the name of the author in the chat.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat too. I'll do that for you, John.
And I have Google Goodreads up here. I am not promoting any specific site if you're looking for the book. I think you can get, if you have Kindle, you can get it on Kindle as well. Some quick staffing updates, just as an FYI, we will be following CDC and Washington State guidance on masking. And I know that is going to be changing after this week. So we are updating our guidance on that. We have interviewed an individual for the Director of Community Data position, and we have a final review this week before we decide if we're going to move forward with that. So you may or may not see a new individual in these upcoming weeks. And then I just wanted to call out that Mariah Kelly is back from maternity leave. I think she is hiding off screen right now. I don't know if I'm going to get her to get back on screen. There she is. So I wanted to welcome her back to the team. She is less than a week back, and she's learning how to work. And I think I see a little bit of a blurry child head there. Do I? Or no? And be a mother all at the same time, as you can see. So welcome, Mariah, and we're looking forward to getting her back into the work. And that is it. Any questions?
John, why don't you just go right into the FE portal transfer? There is a
Alright.
board motion form on pages 7 and 8 of your packet.
So this is just a switch from now that we are separated from the Chelan Douglas Health District. Traditionally, over the course of the last 5 years, what we have normally done, initially as part of the Medicaid transformation project, we got an initial $6 million that went directly to Chelan Douglas Health District, and we've normally utilized that to pay for all the basic operating costs. And then we paid everything else out of the financial executor portal in the past. Traditionally, the financial executor portal was really set up to pay partners out of the portal and not necessarily contractors doing work for us. However, because we've had a hosting fee with all the expenses that we paid out of the Chelan Douglas Health District, anything we could pay out of the FE portal we had done over the last 5 years, basically to avoid that hosting fee. However, that hasn't been the ideal way of doing the payment transfers. And, and just even as a small example, this last week, we were working with a contractor who needed additional information on their 1099 classification because the portal does it specifically as if it's set up to pay to partners. And so contractor information isn't set up as accurately. That we would have been able to solve if we just paid it through the Kashmir Valley Bank. So what we are recommending now that we are established under our own organization, that we don't no longer have a hosting fee associated with it, and that there is a benefit to slowly utilizing some of the funds out of the FE portal to pay administrative expenses, is authorizing a monthly draw from the financial executor portal into the Kashmir Valley Bank to pay for both the general operating expenses of the organization and the consultant fees that we used to pay out of the financial executor portal. So what that would look like for 2022 is a monthly transfer of $178,000 a year. So that doesn't actually impact any of our expenses, I should say. It just impacts where we're paying those expenses out of to a degree. And so what it's doing is it's really just transferring the money from one NCACH bank account out of the public consulting group into our Kashmir Valley bank account. Is there any questions on that?
John, I don't know that you would have any other alternative, would you? I mean, this seems like just your ordinary process of doing business.
Yeah, we could continue in a way doing how we've done it and pay consultants out of the financial executor portal. It just wasn't the initial intent of it. That was really, for us, it was really just a unique fix to manage a hosting fee agreement in the past, but it wasn't how it was originally intended.
So this would also be more efficient, correct?
It would, because the way we are set up for doing approvals in the system, we still pass it through our online accounting system and then to the FE portal. So a lot of these individuals, it just be one transfer and then we pay them all out of our online system.
Okay, thank you.
This is Molly, and we will relook at this every year during the annual budget renewal.
My recommendation would be is to, you're right, look at this every year, depending, because that number may change year after year and adjust it accordingly. We may at some point, because we do have significant funds in the portal, we may always consider looking at investment options, which would potentially lead to different transfers in the future. But this is really specific to pay for operational costs, so I wanted to separate that out, and then we would come back at a later time and talk about any transfers related to the investments.
Any more questions on this? I'm looking for an approval of the FE portal transfer and a motion.
Molly, I would make the motion for approval.
Thank you, Ken. Do I have a second on this?
Second.
Any questions or concerns, discussion at this point prior to voting?
Molly, can I verify who was the second on that?
Deb Murphy. All right, hearing no questions, I will put this out to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Or abstained, would call out at this time. Hearing none, motion is carried and approved. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah. At this time, I have Caroline.
Yeah, thank you, Molly.
Impact update.
Yeah, so I am really excited to bring this back to the board. Like John said, many of you have asked over the years, what is the impact of the ACH work? And this report has been a long time coming. It was actually ready in November, and we as staff slightly delayed its release. We wanted to make some fine tuning things, and then of course we had the big transition at the end of the year. So we're delayed in getting it to you, but here it is. And I'm really excited to have Deborah Hanson. Deborah, if you can wave so people, yep, she's gonna join us and walk us through some of what we found today. about the work that we did through the MTP, specifically with our Whole Person Care Collaborative and also with our Transitional Care and Diversion Intervention Work Group. To set the stage a little bit about, well, first off, if you didn't get a chance to read the report, it's in your packet, pages 9 through 21, but fear not, it's pretty much double spaced. So it's a quick and a fun read. And I hope that if you didn't get a chance to read it, you will after today's meeting. A couple things I wanted to share about ripple effects mapping. Well, first off, I'm curious if anybody, raise your hand if you've heard of this evaluation method before. Okay, that's great. Deborah, you've got a blank slate. You get to wow them today. This is an evaluation process that really caught my eye. It resonated for me because it's especially appropriate for programs or interventions that are complex and involve a wide range of participants and stakeholders, right? Does that sound familiar to any of you? That has basically been the work with our partners over the last 5 years. The other thing I really liked about it is that it's not necessarily about taking credit for good outcomes. It's about understanding the various contributions that all of our partners have brought to the table. And I don't know, I mean, you all probably remember that under the Medicaid transformation, the accountability framework that the state chose was tied to these pay for performance incentives, P for Ps. Kat, I know you're very deeply familiar with them because the NCOs have the pleasure of having P for Ps as well. And there was like a 107-page guide, measurement guide. And basically these P for Ps were metrics that were based on claims, and they really largely focused on healthcare utilization and effectiveness. And all ACHs were held accountable for demonstrating improvements on these metrics. But I think many of you have, well, I have felt this way. Let me speak for myself. I've always felt that those metrics have never really painted the full picture. And from an evaluation standpoint, we've often wondered a few things, like how can we capture the impact of our work as an ACH, since we operate kind of 1 or 2 levels up from the healthcare providers? We're at a systems level. So another way to put that is there a more appropriate way to measure our ACH performance than claims-based metrics? And then also, when you think about health improvement and transformation, it's really complex work. It's dynamic, interdependent. There's lots of partners, lots of moving parts, and relationships really matter. And so how can we capture the impact of our work when the initiatives we're managing are so full of complexity? And it's not as clean cut and deterministic as the P for Ps. So we've investigated and explored a few other evaluation methods to put in our toolbox. I don't know if you all remember, we worked with the Center for Community Health and Evaluation a few years back. They conducted some evaluations for us, mostly based on surveys and stakeholder evaluations. And then our work with Visible Network Labs this year is also a great tool in our evaluation toolbox. So I hope you join the March 22nd partner convening to understand why. So last year, we did 2 ripple effects mapping sessions, and to better understand the progress of our work, and I want to introduce you to someone that I feel super lucky to be able to work with, and that's Deborah. She's an associate professor and county extension director with Washington State University. She focuses on community and economic development in rural Stevens County. So she gets what it's like to work and operate in a rural region. And she's actually one of the original architects of ripple effects mapping. And I think it came out over a decade ago, Deborah, right? And I think you coined the term, in fact.
Yep.
So Deborah, it's not the first time we've crossed paths with her. I don't know if you all remember, years back, Crystal Eshelman helped bring together an opioid response conference, which was based on a distributed conference model. And Deborah really helped Crystal and our ACH figure out that model. And it was really cool because we had different sites across our large region that could listen collectively to one speaker, but then come together locally to figure out what did what we just heard mean for our local community. And Deborah's also on the board of Rural Resources. I wanted to mention that and connect some dots because Rural Resources is a community action council that we are currently funding some exciting work on in the Grand Coulee area. And Deborah, I think you also work on broadband access. And in fact, today we're talking about telehealth and broadband. So she is a kindred spirit and we're lucky to have her. Deborah, I don't think Jean is.
It doesn't look like she was able to make it. Yeah, she's been having some health problems, so it may not have.
No problem. So we had assistance from Jean. You'll see her name at the end of the report. She did a heavy lift on the report writing, and we hope you learn a lot from that report in the packet. But for now, let's turn it over to Deborah, and you can kind of tell us a little bit more about REM, the method, and then also what we discovered from our sessions.
You bet. I wanted to also connect a couple other dots. Senator Parlett, you won't remember me, but my very first job was the Learning Center coordinator here in Stevens County, and you were active in the Wenatchee Learning Center, I know, years ago, 20 years ago, long time ago. So great to see you. And I see Crystal Eshelman is on. We really had some fun working on that project. I understand what you're trying to tell with your evaluation and your stories, because it's the kind of work I do in Stevens County. It's messy and long, and players come in and out, and we never really know exactly. We don't count carrots anymore in our work. We need to know what kind of impact did we have, and does it matter? And I created ripple effects mapping after doing a community leadership program that was 18 months, grant funded. And I heard a story from a friend about an outcome that I thought, we will never capture that in a survey or even a stakeholder group. So created ripple effects mapping to kind of gather this messy, interesting, impactful work that everybody's doing. And the thing that I love the most, and I'll start the process with and end the process with today, is people are talking about their stories, what impacted them, their organizations, their communities, and how they connected it to the work that they've done with you. So we don't come with any preconceived ideas about how it works. So I'm going to share my screen if everybody give me a possibility to do that.
I think you should have that already.
Okay, and let's see if you guys can see my screen then.
And while Deborah pulls up her screen, I'll just give you a little more context. These two sessions that we did last year, I think we had 8 folks from the Whole Person Care Collaborative. Does that sound right, Wendy? If not, unmute and correct me. And then John, I think we had maybe 5 or 6 of your partners from the Transitional Care and Divergent Intervention Work Group. And essentially we asked them, like, what was the impact of your participation in these ACH initiatives?
Yep.
And Deborah, we still don't see your share.
You still don't see my screen. Yep, see, I gotta do this again now. Hang on. And show. I'm pulling up the wrong. Let's see if you see that one.
Yep.
Okay. There we go. I had it up twice. So I want to make sure you can see it. Now you can see 3 women standing in front of a map.
Yeah, it's still in presenter mode though. Deborah, are you okay with that? Where we see the.
Yeah.
If you go to display settings at the top, if you click switch, swap presenter view and slideshow, I think, there you go. Now we don't see your notes.
Don't see my secret sauce coming down the pipe. Well, I want to say first off, it was really enjoyable to work with John and Wendy and Caroline, because they care about the work that you're doing with the NCACH. And I love working with groups that care. I also work with Better Health Together here in our community, and have just been appointed one of the coalition directors, but facilitators. So I'm thoroughly engaged in the work that you're doing, but it was fun to work on this project. So I always like to put this slide up first when I talk about ripple effects mapping, because this was an actual event done down in the Gorge area where these 3 women spontaneously were celebrating this evaluation tool. And to me, having been in extension for 20 plus years now, I've been involved in a lot of evaluation that is not all that fun. It's necessary. I know why we need to do it, but it isn't engaging and fun. And ripple effects mapping is, that because people are telling their own stories, which is why I think it's valuable for your work. Okay, now see if you got the second slide.
Yep, you're good.
Okay. So the few slides you're going to see at the beginning are when we were doing it face to face. And this is a very active process with butcher paper on the wall and colored markers. The process is the same whether we do it on Zoom or not. And there's benefits to both. But the primary purpose is to find out the unintended and intended results of the work that you do. So we're asking them to tell stories about work that they're proud of and things that they found value. And it can be something that you intentionally tried to teach them or have them do, or it can be something that is absolutely unintended. Because it's their story, it can come out in a lot of different ways. But the method works with individuals, with groups, with communities, and with organizations, because again, it's the people in the room that are telling the story and leading it towards the information that you need for your group. So let's first talk about the benefits to the evaluators, because that's what you were looking at when you hired WSU to do this work for you. The benefits are it collects stories and impacts. It captures chain events from complex or evolving work. The work that you do doesn't have a start and stop date. It's continually evolving and always doing more in your communities. You can do it mid-program or post-program. So this is something you can do it at the end of a grant, or you can do it continually through a program. It's also a group validation of results. And people ask me about this method on if people will tell just good stories or embellish stories. And I say, when you're in a group and you tell a story, others will correct you if you're wrong. If you're filling out a survey on your own in the darkness of your office, you can tell anything you want and no one's going to be able to tell if you're spinning it a little bit. So I think it's great to have people all come together and talk about the collective benefits of their work. It's also beneficial when the outcomes are difficult to conceptualize and measure with other methods. And Caroline talked about that a little bit, and even John mentioned it. This is work that we're doing for communities and groups where people are coming in and out, and it is very difficult to measure all things. There are some things you can measure, and you'll see that in some of the ripples. But there's also benefits to the participants. They can see emerging patterns and trends when we start putting things on the wall and when we start putting things on Zoom. They can hear stories that are coming from their peers and their colleagues and think, yes, that happened to me too, or no, my story is a little bit different. They do reflection and growth. They think about their work and their connection to the organization and each other. I like it also because it makes it positive and hopeful when you see the results. Most of these groups are doing their small part of this work with one or two partners, but not collectively. So when you can see it all come together in a big visual way, you start saying, okay, I'm not working on that, but I can see that Joe is working on that. And that's great that he's had some positive outcomes. So it connects me to that larger purpose of the agency, of the community, of the healthy outcomes that you want. And the process itself is fun and engaging, and it's visual. The live one is especially that way, but I think it's even fun on the Zoom version, the online version, because you're hearing great stories and celebrating work that people are doing. So that's the ripple effects mapping in a nutshell, but I want to show you two different maps out of each of the groups and show how the story unfolds as we have this conversation. Since you haven't experienced it, what happens is we ask general questions of the participants, and then we break them out into small groups so that they can talk about it a little bit, but then we pull them all together and map it on an online map. I'm going to show you how the maps unfold, and then I'll show you a bigger map at the end. I do it this way because I like you to see the ripples and how they come about before you see the big map that's hard to see. That's also in your report. Okay, so one of the themes that came out, and Jean Henscheid is the one that helps us take all this data and as qualitative data, analyze it, theme it, and come up with the report that she wrote. It is truly qualitative data. It is not just stories, it's stories that mean something. And one of the themes that she came out with was more gratifying work. So one of the comments was, I was proud because NCACH is a facilitating conduit and it opens doors to many agencies. It improves communications. Now imagine this is a participant telling the story. It improved communications. This person was from the EMS and says it empowered us to have ownership in the process. And it had a downstream effect. Doors are open for me to pick up the phone and call a nurse or a PCP. And when we did that before, we weren't sure if anyone cared or if we were making the right connections. But now we're using EMS power, influence, and knowledge to what we witness in the home to work for a solution with the PCP, clinic, adult aging, law enforcement, and others. So you can see how as they start to tell the story and I ask questions, they're building this story of yes, the doors are open. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that we have power and influence and knowledge. And that's that more gratifying work from start to finish of their work as an EMS. Another story or theme that came out was new skills and building relationships. So this story started with behavioral health and metabolic monitoring, blood pressure and diabetic and things like that. And that's something you absolutely can measure, right? You can do a report. We were held accountable and had to report these metrics. And our organizational goal was to measure up to get the pressure down. Our goal was 80%. And it was really great at the end of the project to see those scores and beat that 80% goal. So you can imagine this person telling the story, how proud they were that we set this high goal and that we were able to reach it. And that we monitored every patient that walked in the door. This is significant because patients are coming into our behavioral health biweekly. But it's a win for our nurses because they feel like they're doing nursing work again and part of the system. And we have countless examples of catching numbers that needed to be reported and referred back to primary care. And it got people treated sooner than if they had waited. So you can see them thinking through this. Yes, we measured. Yes, we met my goal. But this is why it's important. It gets people into treatment sooner than they would have. So ripple effects mapping has 4 different components. So I talked about the positive questions that we ask people. We are not looking for the negative things that didn't work. We want to know what does work. It's very participatory. The groups themselves create this map and create the story in the hour and a half that we spend with them. They do a lot of interviewing and reflection while they're there. They think about the stories that they're telling and what their colleagues and partners are telling. And then the radiant thinking is what creates those ripples. It creates this, it helps us think beyond just a story, but how does that story change and how does it change the work that we do? It's also very participatory in Zoom. You can see Heather up here from the WPCC. When she's telling her story, she's feeling very buoyant about it. And we have somebody typing that story on the map. So not only is she telling a story, she's seeing it come to life on the map. And even though we change the data, not change the data, but we verify the data from the transcript and we make sure that it's accurate, I think there's some kind of transitionary change of you telling a story and seeing that somebody's putting on a map in front of you. That it's that instant validation that my story matters. And that is what I had as far as ripple effects mapping. I know you have the report in front of you, and there's also some breakout stories in there as well. And I would love to answer any questions that you have. It's a very active thing, so it's kind of hard to explain how it magically happens, but the people in the room really enjoy the process. And I think Deb Miller was there. I think she was at one of the events. So she
was at the WPCC ripple effects mapping session.
So I'm here to answer any questions, or or add anything that you would like to, Caroline, Wendy, or John.
I'm just gonna add a link in the chat for those who, if anybody wants to learn more about the history or the methods of REM, you're welcome to go look at that after the meeting. Let's prioritize questions and see if there are any from board members. For those of you who've wondered, like, what impact have we had as an ACH? Do you have questions about the report or even this method, or open for your questions or reflections?
This is Molly. It looks like Penny may have had something in the chat that she was talking about.
Oh, let me check that down. Okay.
If she wants to elaborate.
Yep, and Deb Miller was there doing stories, right? So she could have been the one telling one of those stories. Absolutely.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was off mute. No, that's just what I noticed. And that was really empowering to hear at our last NCACH work meeting, or our first in-person one, to listen to her map the stories out like that for an individual made it very not only empowering, but accountable. It lets you know that action was actually happening, and it gave you a really clear direction of what the next step should be and whether or not the steps you had taken had been resourceful and useful, so that you didn't possibly repeat something that wouldn't work with the particular person. And it also lets you know, because a lot of people, you walk out into I don't have to tell this group, but you walk out into the community and they're like, just give the homeless person a home. And they don't realize the 20 steps to getting a home. And this maps that out, and it explains it to those that we're engaging with more clearly of what the 20 steps to a home looks like. I love it. When Deb shared it with us, primo, chef's kiss, love it.
Oh my God. So Penny, I love one thing I like about ripple effects mapping is completely open source, and we can always change it along the way. And I never thought of it as a tool for helping people understand A, their actions, or B, their next steps on how to get through that. Just such a visual way. I'm going to explore that. That's really great.
I raised 6 teenagers.
Oh,
they want the car right away. To get to the car keys, there's a lot of steps.
Yep. Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just had a question for the NCACH team from the report. Were there things that surprised you all about some of the impact that came forward, or things that you sort of would want to highlight for the board?
Good question. I think the collaborations and relationships and whole person focus, I think we knew that would probably come out of it, because the whole person care collaborative, and then also just bringing all of our different partners together in regular work group meetings. But I think the gratifying work is maybe something that I didn't really think about up front. Like, it's not something that you see in the MTP construct, for example. I've heard some folks mention it for sure as the fourth, what is that called? What's the term I'm looking for? Jesus, I know I've heard you mention it. Like, it's the fourth. Under the Medicaid transformation, they talk about 3 things: reduced healthcare costs. The fear of losing funding, I don't know if any of you want to read that section, but that is an interesting one. Just how much is this work and momentum really, is the funding, the sustained funding critical, or will they be able to continue some of the great work that they've done? And I think you'll see in Wendy's presentation later that some of what they started is going to continue, and there's still motivation with or without continued funding. So that's a hopeful message, but just from a sustainability lens, I think that's an interesting section to go look at. Wendy, John?
Kat, for me, well, one thing I would call out just for all board members is Ray Eckmeyer was not part of this group. So when you see EMS stuff, and he's normally the loudest, most promoting voice, you just assume that was Ray, and it wasn't. But few things, like when we're finding participants for the work, honestly, like when I was looking on a reporting process template, like a written template, And the people who were there, like the people who were there weren't the best report writers. Like they weren't the ones that I would call my A participants. But I was surprised by how much they shared in the verbal format of it, and how excited they were that I learned a lot more from that portion than I did in the reports that they wrote. And then I think for EMS, you know, we had 2 EMS participants there. The thing that's hard to capture, right, like is community paramedicine it's a long haul process that it's not, there's a lot of legislative and conversations that need to go on before you actually get a good set community paramedicine program across the state. And from the reports I see, you can see that our EMS providers have moved from one stage to the next because they're more engaged, they have more ownership, they're making better connections, and they might not have robust community paramedicine programs, but you can see that they've moved closer to that direction because of the work that we've been doing with them over the years. Wendy?
With the WPCC, we had so many touch points with our partners every single month that I don't know that we were really surprised at what we heard. It validated what we thought, and probably the anecdotal stories that we would hear and hear them repeated by other individuals. So there was a lot of validation, and I'll go into some of the impact of the WPCC on the next presentation. So I don't want to get too much into that.
Any other questions from board members as you think about impact in the past or impact in the future?
Deborah, thank you for the presentation. It's something that I've been really interested in learning more about this approach to evaluation. I wonder if there is in the setup anything done to ensure that you end up with a product that is as honest as possible. You mentioned earlier that people will call each other if somebody says embellishing their impact. I find that most people tend to avoid conflict or creating uncomfortable feelings in group settings, and so I wonder if there's something in the setup or some mechanism in place in the process to facilitate that kind of feedback that would help end up with a more honest outcome of the process.
Sure, and it's a question that we often receive because we want to make sure that we're portraying the right information. When we do the data collection, we assume that they're telling the truth and we put it all together. We do then test the audio to the transcript and make sure that the map is correct. And then we do a member check with the people that like Caroline and John and Wendy to make sure that what they know to be true is there. Past that, we do take it back to the individuals, but there's actually no way to tell if they are or are not embellishing a story. During the event, there's many times people will start a story and they'll say, okay, wait a minute, that's a great story. But is that really because of this work with NCACH, or is that something else? It sounds like something maybe you did at the school district. And they'll go, oh yeah, that was sort of related, but you try to have this conversation about how it directly relates to the agency. And it is a tool to use for gathering data. It is not the only tool to use when you're trying to figure out the impacts of your work. This is a way to collect qualitative stories and story gathering. I wouldn't use it if you're really trying to prove or disprove something. I wouldn't use it as the only tool. I myself have used it in groups and then come away with, boy, I really better do some more research on XYZ because they reported that out and that didn't sound quite right. So I better do some checking on that. Or they bring up opportunities that I never thought of. And then I think, oh, I should find out if everybody's run for an office because they keep talking about running for elected office. So it's a way to help you kind of gather some information and stories. It doesn't absolutely, I mean, the questions are very open-ended because we want them to come up with the unintended type of stories, not the we're not asking very specific questions of things. Does that answer your question, Jesus?
Yeah, thank you for that insight.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it makes real hardcore evaluators a bit squirmy. And I'm fine with that. I am not an evaluator. I'm a community development, trying to figure out how to tell a story. I'm an old marketing graphic designer. That part is valuable to me. There are lots of other ways that you have to look at it from the other angles. So
Yep, it's a tool.
It's
in the
a tool, right.
toolbox. Yep. But what I like about it is I feel like you get a lot richer content than when you're looking at, for example, the P4P metrics. And in this case, I feel like it's closer to what we as an ACH are trying to do as we convene partners and try to increase collaboration and relationships. Yeah.
Well, I'll just make one other comment. I've done this for 12 years now. I've probably done 50 or 60 ripple maps with communities and tribes and groups. And every time somebody tells a story, that either the hair on the back of my neck goes up or I cry, because it's so personal and it means so much to them. And it's not the big things all the time. Some of it's that little, I shifted my perspective because of XYZ. And to me, that's, see, look, I'm getting my right back here. That to me is where we are going to make change, is when we get people to say that made a difference in my life. So, okay, enough, I'm done.
And one thing I just wanted to mention really quickly is that we're actually thinking of doing an additional, at least one additional ripple effects mapping session with recovery coaches potentially in the fall, and specifically as it relates to the Narcan vending machines and their impact. And that's, again, just one tool in the toolbox, and it's going to complement some more quantitative data that's being collected by Beacon. But I think it's a really good point to also realize what this tool is for, and then to not lose sight on other tools or other methods that we might need to employ to ask the questions of like, what's not working well and what could work better. So I think that's a good point. It's just one of the things that you might want to do along with other evaluation methods. So I think that the only last thing I'll mention is I apologize for how tiny those maps are on pages 20 and 21. That's how rich those sessions were. And I put a little tip in there. If you're viewing that document in PDF, I really encourage you to get very familiar with your control scroll mouse and also space bar mouse, because that will allow you to zoom in and then move around the document. Otherwise, you'll never be able to get at all those ripples. But it might be something fun to explore, because the people's voices really come through.
So Caroline, is it okay if I stay and listen if we're going to be doing more?
Absolutely, yeah. Anybody, yeah,
listen?
of course.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of stuff that will pique your interest, and that's related to your worlds too, coming up, Deborah. Well, thanks everybody, and reach out if you have any questions about this particular report and method. We can always come back with more information if you want. So,
Before you leave,
oh yes.
Before you leave the subject, I want to first of all thank you for sending out the link to about ripple effects mapping. I'm not entirely familiar with it either. I've heard of it, but I've never actually had a chance to really delve into it a little bit. And in storytelling, in terms of looking whether something's being effective in the community, I think it's helpful. But I also would emphasize that it's one tool, it's not the tool.
Right.
And relying, I guess, somewhat more on my accounting background in terms of qualitative and quantitative. I like to have a combination of both. I don't think that one or the other is fully tells the whole story. And so I guess I'm a little squirrely with it right now, but I'd like to read more, and I'll learn a little bit more. And thank you again for sending it out. Thank you, Deborah, for your time as well.
You bet. Ken, to be honest, I'm squirrely with it sometimes. I mean, I like I said, I'm an old graphic designer, and every time an evaluator says this is a good thing, I go, oh, phew.
Yeah, I totally understand
really
that.
Get it.
Yes, it's actually something that has been discussed from my old community action days. as well. So I understand we've had some discussions in the past about ripple effects because it's always challenging to be able to tell our stories on a number of things and very good. So, and I'm sure Linda would probably understand as well, because many of us who visit the legislature very often, sometimes stories are the best thing that we have. And I think that can be very effective too. So thank you.
Okay, well, thanks for letting me play.
Yeah, stay on, Deborah, for the rest of the meeting. But I just want to say one more thing, because I spent a lot of time thinking about evaluation, not just at the ACH, but in my prior work. And one thing I will say is that I think when you do really complex work, you have to start to explore structures and processes that match that complexity. And when you don't, you end up using methods that might be more linear and predictive with logic models and, you know, control groups and so on, but they're actually mismatched to how complex the work is. So the results that you get from those methods give you an answer that is actually not telling you the full picture, and it sometimes tells you that something is not working when really the evaluation question you posed was not the correct one. So that has been for me a very interesting journey of like thinking about systems level work and what that means in terms of that evaluation methods. And I love talking about it. And so Ken, if you, after you read the report, if you want to talk more and have a back and forth, I think it'd be great, because it's really hard. This work is hard to measure, and the P for Ps are not the answer. That's just my opinion. And I think we'll have even harder things to measure going forward. So food for thought for everyone.
Thank you, Caroline and Deborah. At this time, I'm inviting Wendy up for the WPCC deep dive. Wendy.
Thank you. Let me see what I have here. So for the board, the presentation was in your meeting invite. And for those on the call, I just put a link to the presentation for your reference if you're interested in seeing it. I will say, Ken, to your point, that quantitative data that we look for, that P for P, it's going to take years really to see that. And these stories and understanding shifts in culture and shifts in thinking really come out in this ripple effect mapping, and that's what's going to change those P for Ps down the road. So I do have some evaluation stuff, some of the qualitative stuff in this report too. So may get down to the nitty gritty, but also think about that this presentation when you're reading your ripple effect mapping report, because you'll see the common themes in there. Just confirming you guys are seeing the presentation slide. Thank you. So I'm going to do a little background just to kind of catch up, because we have so many new individuals from when this all started. This was the charge from the WPCC back in 2018. This is the original charter, this is from the updated charter, excuse me, and the vision that was set out. And it was really to promote alignment of provider transformation efforts, to have a shared vision of whole person care, to receive care that focuses on the overall health of individuals and the population at large, and to achieve that triple aim. So that was really the charge of the WPCC, which was really big. And I would like to thank Peter Morgan and Caroline Tillier for really setting the stage. And then I came in to try to carry this out. So a lot of big shoes to fill. But I think our organizations did an amazing job, and hopefully this report will show that as well. Some of the timeline from the WPCC, it started back in 2015 when the ACH got the STEM grant, and the primary care transformation work group was formed, and that was under Peter's direction. Caroline came on, some site visits were done, and then 2018 was the kickoff truly of the WPCC and the WPCC work. The original change plan was created in 2018, but the momentum for that change really didn't get started till 2019. And towards the end of 2019, we had a ton of momentum. And then 2020, March, COVID hit, and everything came to a screeching halt, which was kind of a struggle for us because there was so much snowballing effect happening in the work and everything just kind of stopped. And it has been very difficult to keep things moving, although we were able to move, just not at the same pace as we were moving. Just for a little perspective on all the work that we've done in the WPCC, this is the timeline of that of the different activities. We've done 6 different learning activities, which over the 4 years from 2018 to 2021 took up 35 months total. There were 10 different workshops, the quality improvement, motivational interview, primarily patient family voice and quality improvement, and some brief action planning that goes along with the motivational interviewing. We also had an access webinar and a design thinking workshop that our participants participated in. We had annual site visits and countless hours of practice facilitation and technical assistance provided to the 17 organizations that we started with, and we ended with 15. So just a little background, kind of from 2019 is when the last update I did. So I'm kind of start there versus given the report all the way back. That original change plan focused on 8 different areas, which I listed there. And those are really set out from the MTP. Those are the areas that we said that we would participate on in as the ACH. Each one touched primary care. But let me just remind the others that we did have 2 other work groups, the TCDI, Transitional Care Diversion Intervention work group, and the opioid work group. And so those were, TCDI really worked with the acute care providers, while the opioids worked with a lot of the community. However, it was a mix of both acute care and primary care in the opioid work group as well. There were a few participants in that. We just really felt that we needed to keep these all in the primary care realm as well, just because of how it does touch them, and we needed to bridge that gap. In the fall of 2019, we reduced the focus to 2 areas, and instead of looking at like bidirectional integration and chronic disease, we chose to do disease process. And so we did depression and diabetes. And the reason we did that is because we knew we could touch on the other areas, the bidirectional integration and chronic disease primarily, but we could also touch on transitional care, access, social determinants of health. And we can really work through some of those quality improvement principles through a specific disease process. So teaching how to do metrics, how to pull the data on specific metrics, how to look at that data, how to stratify that data. And that just means that if I'm looking at 1,000 patients who have diabetes, how can I break that down to make it more manageable? So I can take that 1,000 and I can take it down to just one provider who has, say, 250 diabetic patients, and then looking at those diabetic patients, looking at those who are in poor control, or what's defined as an A1C over 9. So then I can take that down to 75 patients, and then I can say, oh, that's 75. So you can see how I'm just narrowing it down, stratifying it, so I can see where to put my focus on in order to help the most needy of those, or the most ill patients. For this reduction, we went from multiple measures in the original change plan down to 5 total. So we had some organizations collecting metrics on 20 plus data points. And so now we were only asking for 5. There were 3 metrics that we required of all of our organizations. One was a diabetes measure, and 2 were depression. And then we asked organizations to self-select 2 additional measures, and that just allowed them to continue working on where they had momentum. We realized that was a good thing, because in March, COVID hit, and the organizations that were struggling with the 8 areas, taking it down to 2 areas, especially in COVID, helped us to continue moving forward. Although we were going slower, we were still moving forward and accomplishing a lot. And you'll see that in the data as we proceed on. So looking at the data, this is from the population health plan. The data look back is from September 2019. When we restarted the population health plan in September 2020, make sure I got the dates right, after we paused because of COVID, we asked for a 12-month look back. So if they're reporting on in September 2020, they're looking back all the way to October. So it would be October 2019 through December 2020. So it was a 1-year look back. Most organizations were able to do that. Some had more difficulties doing that. So we asked all the participants to collect and report the 3 quality indicators into additional indicators most relevant to their work. And we asked them to report it from September 2019 to 2021, which I just explained. I do want to note that the data I'm sharing is quality improvement data, and it was for the purpose of learning, sharing, and improvement. Now, these organizations had different ways that they collected or reported on the data. Some of it was by team. So they really focused on one provider and that provider team. So the only data they reported on was really that provider's data. Other organizations did it within a specific department, which is kind of more true for the behavioral health organizations that have multiple departments. And then others reported on their entire organization because that's the way it was. There is some difference. We don't share some organization data because they switched the way they reported or how they reported the data. So it's a little bit different. So it's maybe not shared in the collective data point. So just remembering that as we look through the data. So the first one we'll look at is that hemoglobin A1C pore control, which is what I was talking about earlier. And that's for the A1C to check for diabetes. And what we're wanting, pore control is defined as an A1C greater than 9% or a known diabetic who has not had an A1C in 12 months. So that's kind of an easy one to catch. If they don't have it in 12 months, you can always get them in to get an A1C drawn to see where they're at. In reporting, this is a box and whisker plot that our improvement advisor used to report out data. And you can see from the organizations that reported, 10 of them, the low number of 8%, the high number of 39%, and the median was somewhere between 21 and 34% when we ended. This is the overall, and I didn't get the numbers from her, and I think she's on vacation, so when I asked her, she didn't respond back. But you can see just from the lines on the graph that median line has started to drop over the last 5 months of data reporting, which means that fewer people within the organization's data sets have A1Cs greater than 9. So as a collective of all of our teams, we're starting to see the shift in that data dropping from the measures that they are taking. And mind you, these data are difficult to move. These data points are difficult to move. Yeah, you can bring patients in who haven't had an A1C in 12 months, and that's really going to help you. But then you need those dietary and physical changes. There's really lifestyle changes that's really going to help those individuals with poor control. And then you also had COVID and people not coming to going to the doctors as often as they probably should. And there's being completely consumed with COVID and everything COVID. That word has just become that 5-letter word, 4-letter word, 5-letter word, that for them to be able to maintain some of their numbers is actually a really good success when we found a lot of numbers really jumped off. When you looked at individual organizations that reported on this, we saw that 5 organizations saw a improvement signal, which means when we have run charts, there are specific run chart rules. We're not doing actual data analysis or statistical analysis. We use run chart rules. And with that, you have to have 10 different points. It depends on how many points are above the median and below the median. It depends on how many times you've crossed the median. It's like several different, I think there's 5 different rules that you have to abide by to look at it. But what I'm really demonstrating here is really that the 5 organizations that have found signals of improvement because of the work and that they have been implementing. The next one is depression screening and follow-up. This is truly a screening in the sense of how many patients are you, of the patients that you're seeing, how many are you screening for depression? And this was really exciting. We had a high of 93% and a low of 2% at the end. And a median of somewhere between 25 and 86. So you can see that it was definitely varied across the teams themselves. When you look at the box and whiskers from October 21 to December 2021, that median stayed the same, but if you see that lower number of the number of individuals screened from 21% was inching up to 25%, whereas on the top number, a higher number was 79% and has up to 86%. So our lows and our highs are increasing, but our overall denominator, because it was so great, didn't necessarily move the overall median itself. But this is definitely positive movement when we're looking at it from a quality improvement perspective. Here are the 6 organizations of all those that did submit their data, the 6 organizations that had some level of improvement. I will again note that we had some organizations with difficulty in collecting their data, other organizations that switched the way they reported data. So you may not see that they had a signal improvement, but that's because they didn't meet the rules of run chart rules. And so we couldn't call it that within the way that this was analyzed. So don't get caught up in those organizations, or why didn't my organization, or why didn't that organization do it? Remember, this is improvement data, and this is a part of the teams that they were working on as well. Depressive disorder monitoring, that's for individuals who have diagnosed depression and that they are being monitored every 6 months, so that they have that PHQ-9, which is a depression screening tool. That type of screening is done every 6 months to monitor their depression symptoms. And you can think of it like the A1C is for diabetes, is to monitor the diabetes. You get a blood draw. The PHQ-9 is the same way for depression, to monitor their level of depression as they come in. And you can see on here the high of 82% to a low of 14%, and a median that's somewhere between 28 and 75%. You can see the little dots within there, and that's the actual, in the box and whiskers, those are the different organizations and where they're actually reporting at within that box and whiskers. Here is the overall. We went from 50%, we got up to 64%, but back down to 57 in the last as a median. For those that were being followed up. The low number went from 11% up to 14%, and 79% to 82% on that top line. And just remember, this is really important, because this is really during the time period when a lot of individuals aren't coming to the clinic or aren't being seen, or if they're being seen, things or in a more of a chaotic state because of COVID. And so some things got dropped. But because of the mental health, status of mental health going on within our community, the depression screening and depression monitoring is something our organizations really held on to for the benefit of our patients. And you'll see that we had multiple organizations who had a signal of improvement for depression monitoring. The next one, these are self-selected measures. I'll go through them quickly. These are what organizations chose to work on, but I just wanted you to see what that was. So we had the blood pressure control. We had 3 organizations working on that measure, and we had one with a signal of improvement. We had clinical organizations working on the diabetes foot exam. So one measure of a signal of improvement for that one. We had here are additional, excuse me. Here we go. Statin therapy for prevention and treatment of cardiovascular disease. We had an organization working on that. Medical attention for nephropathy. The follow-up after ED visits for mental illness. It's a 30-day follow-up. Increased access to mental health service penetration, SUD treatment penetration, increased access to substance use disorder. So for those who are diagnosed with a substance use disorder, that they're getting in and getting some type of treatment within the clinical setting. It obviously doesn't calculate for those individuals who seek treatment outside of the clinical office. And this is the OUD treatment penetration. Serious mental illness, so individuals who have a PHQ-9, that's that depression screening tool I spoke about earlier, whose score decreased by 5+ points among clients with a PHQ score of greater than 19. And so this is really one that was followed by a behavioral health organization to really see the seriously mental ill patients. PHQ greater than 19 who have not attended appointments. So you can see that there was a wide range. We did a lot of focus on behavioral health, which is the mental illness and the SUD, and diabetes. Just some quick numbers for our WPCC and the overall population health plan. There was 18 months of data collection and improvement efforts. There was the global pandemic. There were 3 core improvement indicators and 19 self-selected improvement indicators. There were 19 population health plan teams and 15 WPCC teams. So there were 6 teams who chose not to participate in the population health plan, which was totally optional. 8 of the lands had 1 or more signals of improvement, 12 of the teams with 1 or more signals of improvement. There were 30 unique signals of improvement across all indicators, and 15 unique indicators with the signal of improvement. And the difference between that is the number of unique organizations who had that signal across all of them. When you looked at the numerators and denominators for the data behind this, you had 2,900 plus individuals with A1Cs that were well controlled. You had 8,300 plus individuals screened for depression and received follow-up as of the last measure that was reported. You had 1,790 individuals receive symptom monitoring for depression, which was the last measure, and you had 15,000 plus citizens whose care and lives were touched through this work. So when we talk about impact, this is a lot of where we're making impact within the WPCC that we were working on. So now I'll go in some of the qualitative. At the end of the WPCC, as we wrapped up in December, we decided to do exit interviews, evaluations, however you want to call it, with all of our organizations. I think we were able to get all but one. Those were conducted in December and January, and a CCMI, CSI, one of our consultants, one faculty conducted the interview, and I also sat in and did some note taking and follow-up questions towards the end. The interview objectives were to document successes and challenges from the past 4 years as it relates to the WPCC, to understand how sites are thinking about value-based care, and to inform future learning activities and collaborative change efforts. And this is what we learned. So these are some broad themes, and then I'll break it down by each question. Key themes that arose from the changes and themes from the inception of the WPC: that participants cited numerous changes in culture. They had the capacity for change, a clinical care improvements, and organizational process. Themes were better processes for measurement and monitoring population health. There was a better understanding and use of QI processes. There was more standardized, routine, and more reliable, comprehensive care processes, and increased access and capacity in others. And these are the themes that arose from multiple organizations. What most were proud of were the concrete changes that they made, and they also cited the collaborative peer-to-peer sharing and commitment to local teams for improvement. The main challenges was the staff losses, recruitment, and orientation training. We asked them not to talk about COVID because COVID was a challenge for all of them, but we wanted to dig deeper to see what ones are. Sites largely indicated they intended to continue their improvement work. Many were definitive in this intent. A smaller number shared some of the challenges they expected to encounter as they seek to continue. Readiness for value-based payment. Primary care obviously was more ready than behavioral health because many have already been doing this. But there was some levels of readiness within the behavioral health organizations as well. Some of the NCACH supports generally focus on convening cross-organizational learning and collaboration. So what were the individual questions? The first one was, what has changed since we first started in March 2018? So this was kind of those key themes and changes that we first talked about. And this were some of the more detailed answers. So the measurement and monitoring for managing population health and QI, the systems of reports, some better monitoring, better information workflows to monitor, clinical measurement dashboard, commitment to track data outcomes and use it to drive improvement, better at using data and information, Increased access and capacity was another, and so there was a better access to primary care, some integration work, more staff. We have a lot of different behavioral health staff that have come on in the form of like psych IMPs, counselors, and some licensed mental health counselors that are being embedded in our primary care organizations. Truly that integrated model. There was also some expanded services and new skills. The improved relationships and partnerships was also part of that. The most proud of people were just the changes that they were able to make. As stated in the ripple effects mapping, there was a level of enthusiasm. Sometimes when we are in the nitty gritty, as we're talking to them, a lot of times, because there's a level of trust with Mariah and I and with our consultants, we hear a lot of pain points to this improvement because it's a lot of work, especially during COVID. But they stuck with us. And through that, when they're able to pick their head up and look at the larger picture, they really saw that shift in culture, and that processes and systems internally were actually shifting and changing. And that is a huge lift, which is very exciting for those who are really doing the blood, sweat, and tears and leading this effort within their organizations. Team partnerships and commitment to improving patient care was another one. So I kept that information deep on the slide so that you can review them at your convenience. I won't read them. I won't read everything on here. Challenges obviously were the staff losses, juggling multiple priorities, getting everyone to move in the same direction. I heard at times it felt like they were herding cats. The scale of the MCP at the beginning, when you have 8 different focuses, it was hard to wrap your head around, especially with you were new to this work. We found that from the very beginning, we had a lot of organizations who were not set up in a way for success as it pertains to their EHRs. And so we saw organizations, I think all organizations except for one, and that one is actually starting to go through an EHR. So everyone had changed or actually either got an EHR or switched EHRs during this process. And so that was a huge challenge just because of the time it takes to go live. If you're a clinical partner, you know what it means to go live with an EHR, and it's all hands on deck, and it's cumbersome, it's new work, there's frustration, there's a lot going on with that. And so that happened to be a challenge, but it actually was a good thing because it really helped them build their data and the reports that they need to collect the information necessary. So how likely are you to continue the work? These are some of the definitive responses. We're excited to keep going. We'll definitely continue. We're not turning back. We're all in. We really recognize that these organizations put in the system changes, and not only within management, but within their teams. The people on the ground doing the work have really shifted. And so those organizations, it's so embedded that there's just no turning back. And we had an organization that wants to hear what we're doing in NCACH before they decide if they're continuing. Readiness for value-based care. Again, there's nothing more to say to that. I left this information in here as far as that is concerned. From their perspective, primary care was because they already many of them already collected data, or I'll say the FQHCs collected the data because of their UDS measures. A lot of the rural health clinics had never collected data before, but they are starting to collect the data now, not only for the ACH work, but their ACO work too, which is the Medicare component they're having to collect data. So the way I look at it, I think that's probably one of the foundations is getting an EHR and learning how to collect data and give yourself reports to know where you're at within your own population. To be able to give that path and use that path and that data to drive the improvement work within your organization, versus waiting for MCOs who are going to only have a subset, only that particular patient. So only CHPW patient on that report, or only Melina. So if an organization can see all of their patients at one and know where to focus and drive improvement, it's really going to help in their overarching population health changes. Our behavioral health organizations are a little further behind because they've never had to do this. And they're also going to be a little further behind on VBP readiness. I lost the word, implementation. And so they're not going to be implementing value-based payment anytime soon. So they have a little bit more space, and we're still here to help them as needed. What can NCACH do to help? Continue convening partners, providing resources, listening and advocating, and then some trainings on specific topics. When you think about the WPCC, what did you find most helpful? And you'll hear this called out in the ripple effect mapping and those anecdotes as well. It was really the connecting and convening with partners and peers and building relationships internally within their own teams, as well as internally as well as externally. Based on where your organization is now, what support would be helpful for the future? Again, meetings and trainings, continue with peer connections, periodic check-ins. If we were to do more learning activities, to do it on a shorter time frame. Our last population health plan was over about 15 months, and so it was definitely very long, and it didn't give people a break. And so we're learning that they just needed that break, and we threw that on top of COVID. So I do know we are on the right track, because in 2020. Healthcare Authority announced their multi-payer primary care transformation model. There's not a whole lot known about it. I think John said there was a presentation to the EDs today, and rural health clinics and FQHCs are probably not going to be a part, at least of the first cohort, just because of their payment model or reimbursement model is different than non-RHCs and FQHCs. But this is coming, and this is part of the value-based payment. With this model that is coming as it rolls out, they're going to give organizations 3 years for proposed transformation. These are the proposed transformation metrics that I'm showing you. But they have 4 different areas: access, care coordination, whole person care, and application of actionable analytics. And if I go back, everything in red that we boxed are the primary focuses of the WPCC since its inception. We narrowed some of this down, but this is really where we were focusing and building and teaching through the learning activities to really help prepare our organizations to where they needed to be. Once that 3 years is up and they move toward quality metrics, these are the proposed metrics that they're talking about. And again, those in red are the ones that we focused on within the WPCC. So we've definitely given a kickstart to what's to come in the value-based permit as it pertains to Washington State. So we're really excited about that. We believe that we have, after talking to the organizations and understanding what they've done and where they've been and where they're at now, they're definitely a lot further along, and some are further along than they probably realize they are, because there's a lot of foundational work that has been laid. Some of the next steps will continue to be a resource to our clinical partners. We're no longer meeting monthly with the WPCC. I think there's just this transition with COVID that everyone just needed a break from meeting and to take a breath. And so we've kind of disbanded it as we know it, but that doesn't mean the clinical partners are disbanded for good. We will start occasional WPCC's meetings later this year, and probably do them quarterly to bring back the clinical partners to have more discussions and networking with each other about some successes and challenges or barriers that they are experiencing. We'll also be doing a quality improvement sprint for non-clinical partners starting in April, and after that we'll tee up the quality improvement affinity group. And this is just an open opportunity for individuals who are actively working on quality improvement to come together and share stories, bring questions, bring challenges, and have the group talk about what they are doing to mitigate those. And we are also planning a joint MCO clinical meeting to occur later this year to really talk about value-based payment. What does that mean for organizations? What are the struggles? What are the barriers? And how can we, from an ACH, an MCO, and a clinical perspective, how can the three of us come together, work together to further this along? What needs to happen with that? And with that, I know I spoke really fast. I just wanted to share a couple pictures. This was from our last population health plan. This was our Brady Bunch picture. This was every single time. And this is a nice smiley faces. I asked them to take the picture. So they all turned their cameras on if they didn't have it on and smiled, which is lovely. And if you're not having fun, it's not worth doing. So this is our crazy picture to end out our population health plan. So thank you. And we have about 4 minutes before the next presentation that I'll ask open for any questions, or there's my email. You're welcome to email me and set up a time to talk as well.
Hey, Wendy, this is Mike Tugg. That was really helpful. I don't know if this presentation attached to our invite, because if it did, I couldn't open it.
I think it got attached this morning. If not, there's a link in the chat box to the presentation itself.
Yeah, I did attach it this morning to the invite.
All right. Yeah, it's interesting to me that like the topics that were requested for the ongoing training are so common now among organizations around population health and population health strategy and behavioral health integration and the social determinants, and all those are really key trainings that we need. And I'm wondering, again, as we look at opportunities, how do we collaborate around those trainings so we can share the resource?
Yeah, it's a great question. Right now we're doing the behavioral health, and we're involving not only clinical primary care or the physical health and behavioral health providers, but the whole community. And that was just a way because we need the whole community, and we're hoping that a lot will come out of that and some action steps to help with that. And some of that is really provider specific. So some is really going to dive deep into the clinical arena. The other areas we'll be looking at what is the best way to proceed. We started I think we had 2 meetings right before COVID, really diving into doing something more deeper on social determinants of health. And then that got put on pause. So something that we're looking into, and how can we bring that to our organizations, is definitely on the list.
Thank you, Wendy. And this time I'm going to ask you to just continue on with the telehealth presentation.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Can I ask quickly, does anyone just need a quick minute break? I know we've had some pretty intense presentations, or do people just want to power through the last presentation? I'm getting a thumbs up from Nancy for break or power through. Power through. All right, I just want to make sure that means you have to continue to focus and pay attention. So wanted to give that option. I didn't want WSU to present to you guys if not. All right, go ahead, Wendy.
Great. So last month, we presented on the clinical maturity. So that was all about the clinical providers. And this month, we're going to present on the community perspective. And this is, if you'll recall, we had we divided up that RFP, and the clinical, the community portion was given to WSU team. So I'm going to turn it over to Christina, Janessa, and Susan. They're all on your screen if you look for their names, and I'll turn it over to them. They'll be sharing their own slides and going through that presentation. And that should be also on your calendar invite for the board. I will throw a link in the chat for others who are interested.
Are you seeing just the overall presentation, or are you seeing the display slide?
Display. So you
I hate when it does that. 1 second. Better?
Yes,
you got it. All right. Been using Zoom for a year. You think I'd figure this out by now? All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. I'll just go ahead and get to the project team. So Christina Sanders is the Director of Division of Governmental Studies and Services and WSU Extension. I am Project Manager at DGSS, and we've taken a role in helping do the various community elements. And Brian Anderson is also part of DGSS. And Janessa Graves is with the College of Nursing, and she did the GCM, which she's going to talk about more in depth. And we also had Kevin Harris from the William D. Ruckelshaus Health Center, who's an expert in healthcare policy, who was helping us on the project. So I wanted to introduce our team and then just dive right into it because there's a lot. We're going to give a little bit about the methods we use to kind of take the community pulse or communities pulse, right, in the region, present some of the results from each and some preliminary recommendations and discussion we're seeing based on what we have captured from the communities. So going ahead, we use a lot of different methods to try to gauge opinions and perceptions on telehealth in the region and preferences for telehealth in the region. This included semi-structured interviews with organizations in the region. The initial list we created had over 300 organizations. We created 4 priority groups based on that. The first priority group was organizations that were involved in healthcare, in some form of healthcare. The second priority groups included city governments, nonprofit organizations, and then there were 2 other priorities over that. We also talked to public utility districts or tried to reach out to public utility districts. So we talked to a broad range of organizations. There were 3 waves of invitations. That seems low. I feel like we did more than that. There was a lot of back and forth trying to schedule interviews. We conducted the interviews over Zoom and we had 28 total participants by the time that we were done. As part of the project, we also did a key informant interview with somebody with the district library. And then we did a survey of libraries as well, and they helped us distribute that. We don't focus much in this presentation on the information we garnered from libraries, but we did try to figure out what kind of resources libraries had to potentially help support telehealth in the area. We also did group concept mapping. It's a way to brainstorm approaches for, well, group concept mapping is an online, it almost looks like an online focus groups in a lot of ways, except everything can be done asynchronously for the most part. So you have participants sign on, they do a brainstorming of approaches. We had them focus on providing or accessing telehealth in their community. You sort through all the collected ideas into groups, and we had them, the final step is rating feasibility, impact, and costs. And so from that, you do a statistical analysis of the group ratings of, we did feasibility, we did impact, and we did costs. And you can do a statistical analysis and kind of identify options that are considered high feasibility, high impact. We generate thematic grouping and ideas from this, but we will present, Janessa will present GCM more in depth and kind of the results of that. We also did an end user survey. So there was an online survey of individuals. We did a survey in English and a survey in Spanish. We distributed that through Facebook and other means, although Facebook at times was less successful than we had hoped in getting the reach out for the survey. It was shared via email and social media. And when we were finished, we had 493 English survey respondents and 133 Spanish respondents. So that sample is very limited, but it does give us some insights into telehealth preferences in the region. And then we also did secondary data analysis. We pulled census data, we pulled Washington State broadband data to kind of assess what the region looks like and their readiness for telehealth. So I'm going to go through some of the results and then turn it over to Janessa when we when we get to the GCM analysis. So we did semi-structured interviews. So when the time we were done, we had 4 healthcare related organizations. We had city governments, non-governmental organizations, and 1 public utility district in the final tally. So the interviews we did across the organizations said that telehealth is absolutely needed. They need increased access to medical care, and the people that they are serving need this access to healthcare. So there was agreement that it was a definite need in the region. Some of the things for why it's a need is the distance to services, especially for specialty care. The distance is too far, especially for a lot of populations. There's a lack of specialists in the area. And one thing that they also mentioned was that there's no one approach. There's no one approach that's going to serve everybody. That we need a multitude of strategies given the diversity in the region and the healthcare related issues and the technology related issues. And one government employee, we quoted this because it really solidifies that need, is we deserve a telehealth service. So there seems to be support behind this and agreement that it's necessary. They also noted several challenges in the region to a telehealth strategy, especially a singular telehealth strategy. And one of the big ones that comes across all of the methods is broadband access. Broadband access, which you know, is a big issue in the region. There's a high level of lack of broadband access. They also mentioned the lack of technology. There's a lack of access, but there's also a lack of knowledge. And there's real concern about that because as you acquire this technology, if people are frustrated with it, they're not going to use these services. Knowledge is a big issue. They also, and this comes out in other methods too, but it was really big in the interviews, they emphasized that there's trust concerns. There's concerns over security of the telehealth platforms and whether their information is secure. And there's a high amount of distrust in terms of whether they'll be safe utilizing these services, whether their information is secure. And so that's a big barrier that will have to be overcome. And this came across several different organizations with several different groups that they were servicing, that trust would be a very big issue with any telehealth strategy that was pursued. They also mentioned that outreach and awareness was really important. Not only outreach and awareness that the communities have to know that this is available and how to use it. So there has to be some sort of campaign to let them know it's available, but also many organizations that there has to be awareness among providers, that we need providers to be on board. And some people who are already working in telehealth mentioned that it can be very difficult to get a hold of providers in order to support telehealth strategies. Some of the clear issues that come out from these interviews in terms of whatever strategy is pursued, broadband access, technology, and trust is a big issue. I feel like I'm going really fast. The end user survey. So as I said, we had 493 English survey responses and 133 Spanish responses for a total of 626 percentages of respondents. So the percentage on the left is the English survey. The percentage on the right is the Spanish survey. So about 45% were from Chelan, 25% from Douglas for the English survey, 9% from Okanagan, Grant 15.4%. If they lived outside of these counties, they didn't take the survey unless they indicated that they got services within those counties. So even if you didn't live in those counties, but you routinely receive medical assistance there, you could still take the survey. So, just looking at this, we didn't use non-probability sampling, so we can't generalize from this in terms of margin of error and confidence intervals, but we can kind of look at the sampling to tell us what it tells us and how comparable it is to the population in terms of age and some other factors. The respondents to the survey tended to be younger, which is not surprising given it's an online survey. They do tend to trend younger. Respondents tended to be more affluent or wealthy, which is also not surprising given an online survey, and that will impact how they respond to some of the questions in the survey. There are some differences between English and Spanish surveys, which are interesting and deserve a further look into, especially as any strategies are pursued on how that would impact the Spanish population and their needs and preferences. So we asked several questions in the survey, and we're only focusing on some of the questions in this presentation today. We asked about their usual source of medical care. And a high amount of the Spanish respondents indicated that hospital or emergency room was their usual source of medical care, which is interesting given that they tended to respond to the survey. They were wealthier than the respondents who responded to the other survey, they tended to get their medical care from the hospital emergency room. For the English survey, 38% stated that they primarily use primary care, followed closely and to that by the hospital and emergency room, but it was much more evenly distributed for that group versus the Spanish survey. So. Perception of current healthcare access, majority of respondents rate current access to be good quality and affordable healthcare. They were positive. They overwhelmingly said they had good quality and access to affordable healthcare, which is again interesting when you consider that many of the Spanish respondents indicated that they were using the emergency room for their treatment or the hospital. Many respondents feel that there are not enough specialists in the area. We asked about specialists and what specialists they would like to see. The two big areas of need that came up across both surveys was behavioral and emotional health and cardiovascular specialists were lacking in the area. Many respondents have a healthcare need that is hard to get care for in their community. So they did indicate there were needs that they had issues getting care for. Perceptions of good access and affordable care. So access to good and affordable care, just kind of want to show this excellent, good. They had they could rank from excellent to very poor, not sure. In terms of both, overwhelmingly said good and affordable care. And for the Spanish survey, it was remarkably overwhelming majority said it was good and affordable care. And again, that is interesting when you consider that a high amount of them are using the emergency room. There, in the English survey, about 40 or a slight majority, 54% said that they had difficulty receiving care. And then in the Spanish survey, 64% said that they didn't have difficulty finding care, which is another interesting finding when you consider the two groups and their responses to other questions. Perceptions of telehealth, most are for expanding telehealth. They think it'll meet the healthcare needs in their community. They think it's a good strategy for meeting the needs in their community. Most participants are familiar with telehealth, which shouldn't be surprising given COVID-19 that they have used telehealth in the past. The most preferred telehealth are video appointments and phone appointments. Overwhelmingly, they prefer either video appointments or phone appointments to receive that care to other strategies. They do have several concerns with telehealth expansion, including internet access and reliability. Privacy, again, that concern of privacy, security, and trust comes up in the survey and concerns over that. Technology access and the quality of care that they will receive in telehealth versus in-person appointments. We did ask them if telehealth options help meet healthcare needs in their community, and just overwhelmingly yes. More so for the Spanish survey, as 91.5% said yes, compared to 73% in the English survey. Familiarity with telehealth, again, most are familiar, which isn't surprising given COVID-19. We did ask how much they had used telehealth both before and after, and unsurprisingly, it went up both prior to COVID and during COVID. It went highest for online and phone appointments, and again, that seems to be the preference too for online or phone appointments. But it went up across the board except for self-service kiosks and mobile health clinics. Willingness to use telehealth services in the future. A high rate indicated they would be willing to use telehealth services in the future. There's limitations to survey questions like these. It's very difficult to determine future behavior based on survey questions. But there was a high amount that indicated that they would be interested across both surveys. A high majority among the Spanish respondents versus the English respondents, but still pretty high overall. We asked them also to rank the telehealth service types that they would be willing to use. And so I did want to show that. Video again, there is a slight difference between, well, I shouldn't say slight, there is a difference between Spanish respondents and the English survey respondents. For the Spanish survey, the majority said they would rather have phone Why that is, we can't really speak to. It might be that interpreter services are better via phone. It might be an internet access issue, although they're taking an online survey. So it could be difficult to tell what that is. We did notice that a high amount of Spanish surveys respondents seem to come from similar locations. So it could be indicative that they're using a community service or a library to fill out the survey and get access to that, or a school. But 56% preferred phone. For English survey, a slight, almost half preferred video. Less preferred the other options that we gave them, telehealth, kiosk, and mobile health. I'm going to let Janessa take over and do the group concept mapping to show those results.
Awesome. And I'll just say next slide when I want a next slide, if that's good. You can advance it. Okay. So group concept mapping is really this great method for engaging participants and essentially combining qualitative and quantitative data. So it's really neat. And if anyone has ever sat through a group, a meeting in person where you have ideas on the whiteboard or ideas on pieces of paper around the room, and you're voting with little sticky notes and putting ideas on sticky notes, and then the facilitators grouping them together. I'm sure a lot of people have had that experience. This is very similar to that. So there are 3 steps that I'm going to talk about. There are actually 6 steps in group concept mapping, the methodology, but I'm going to talk about 3 in this presentation: brainstorming, sorting, and rating. And so during the brainstorming session, we're asking participants in a separate survey from the end user survey, but community members and stakeholders, with a prompt. And so the prompt we used here was I think I'll get to it in the next slide, but what ways can we bring telehealth to your community, or what are some effective approaches for bringing telehealth to your community? So this is really sort of positive mindset, not looking at barriers, but like what are some options that might work out for North Central Washington? The next step is the sorting step. And so the sorting step is we take participants, again, they can be the same folks or a different group of folks, and ask them to sort all of those brainstormed ideas into conceptual groups. And so essentially imagine taking all those Post-its and grouping some Post-its here, and maybe they put some over here that are a different type of idea, and that's how sorting works. Rating is completely separate, and that is taking each of those ideas and asking respondents or participants to rate them on various metrics that we've provided. And so we asked our participants to rate each of these brainstormed ideas in terms of impact to their community, feasibility in their community, and potential cost. And we said, if you don't know, just do your best guess, because obviously I don't necessarily know how much it costs to do, telehealth carts in every fire department in Okanagan County, for example, but they can kind of guess vis-a-vis the other brainstormed ideas. So for the brainstorming step here, you can see the number of respondents in the table at the top. So we had 14 respondents individually provide sort of just this brain dump of every possible idea they could think of. And then we also pulled ideas from the key informant interviews. So we went through all of the interviews, and any ideas that bubbled to the surface or came out in those interviews, we threw into the pile as well. And then for the sorting step, we had 16 respondents, and the rating step, we had 16. So these numbers down at the bottom, we initially had 61 statements that participants provided, the 14 participants and the interviews provided. And then we review them, and we kind of go through and see, is this redundant? Make sure there aren't any major errors in spelling or inappropriate content, and then also divvy up some that were potentially multiple ideas embedded within a single statement. And so we went from 61 statements actually to 70. A lot of times you'll go from a lot to a little, but in this case, people would just provide a brain dump of ideas all within a single answer box. And so we had to kind of separate those out. And so we ended up with 70 ideas or brainstormed concepts after the review. Next slide. So these are some examples of statements from the brainstorming, and I literally just kind of picked these out of the list, so they're not representative per se, but the prompt that we gave folks was possible approaches to providing or accessing telehealth in North Central Washington communities include ... And they could just put whatever they wanted. So we had things from expanding broadband access to providing transportation to locations with telehealth access, or providing, really out of the box ideas, providing solar powered picnic tables that have free Wi-Fi and a place to plug in a laptop. Or the other example is establish telehealth centers with privacy and booths and rooms in central locations in town. So we had 70 of these sort of types of concepts. So these are examples of those. Next slide. So this here is a point map. And so after the respondents had grouped all of the concepts, so they saw a whole list of these concepts, and they said, group these ideas together and group these, figure out which ideas are similar in your mind and give them each of those piles a label. So every number here on this map, this point map, represents an idea. So it's 1 through 70. And you can see that the proximity to one another indicates similarity of ideas. Does that make sense? So we have, this cluster off to the right, top right, northeast corner. We have sort of the northwest corner cluster, and then we have like the southeast, if you will. Next slide. So next we have the cluster map. So this was what we deemed to be the optimal cluster solution for the project. So it's based on sort of how cohesive are the statements within each of the concepts. And so we could have done a 15 cluster map and there would have been a bunch of little boxes around here, but yeah, we could do 70 clusters and then be 70 ideas and each has their own cluster. But we really wanted to try to nail it down for you all to provide these kind of concise groups of ideas. And so based on the cohesiveness of statements spatially in the point map, and then also the hierarchical cluster analysis within the software that we used, the final solution comprised 6 clusters. And so in this map, there are these ideas of, well, we'll switch. Can you go to the next slide? So this is the cluster solution with the labels. And the labels were created by, respondents, when I create the cluster, I can see kind of generally what's a possible cluster name. And then I tinkered with them a little bit and fixed some spelling errors. But let's talk about cluster 1 to start. So cluster 1 contains approaches to providing and access telehealth that require some or involve some community infrastructure. So this includes example 2, quote unquote, established telehealth centers with privacy booths and rooms in central locations in towns, the example I showed you before. This statement had a really low, what we call bridging value, indicating that participants consistently sorted that with other statements around it. And so all of these statements really hung tightly together. So there's 17 statements in this cluster, and they include telehealth kiosks in community locations like supermarkets, doctors' offices, fire stations, and also mobile vans serving as Wi-Fi hubs to communities and public parks. Cluster 2, which is right below that, it makes up, there are 11 statements there, and we call that ensuring access to telehealth technology. And so that includes approaches that evolved bringing broadband, laptops, or hotspots to communities to and allow members to access telehealth. There was some conceptual overlap with cluster 1. So in cluster 2, we had a suggestion to establish internet kiosks, which is unsurprising given the proximity of the clusters. So their clusters are very similar, but they're also different because the first one, community infrastructure, really is engaging community entities to help carry out these interventions. So they're real community partnership clusters. Cluster 3 had 6 statements in it, and that relates to the technology infrastructure required to implement a telehealth program. So these were such suggestions like create a service or an app to make booking telehealth appointments more easily, or have a app to link healthcare information across different platforms. So real tech oriented. Cluster 4, which is the northeast corner, so think Maine, New York, is characterized by 15 statements that describe different approaches to accessing telehealth that require training or awareness of telehealth within the community. So educating community members about telehealth, that it's easy and reliable and convenient and private, or ways to increase computer literacy. Then the 2 other clusters on the West Coast here, we have cluster 5 that had 4 statements in it, and they were pretty heterogeneous. That's why there's like this little stack on cluster 5, because they didn't really hang together really tightly. And these were all just very kind of broad statements like create a telehealth system like 911 for triage and intervention to connect relevant resources. Or another example in this cluster would be changing state and federal regulations to be more accepting of telehealth services. So very broad interventions, not restricted to just focusing on a single town or community. And then cluster 6 had 17 statements in it, hung together a lot better. And they were looking at this one, included suggestions for providing access to telehealth that would require or involve engaging the healthcare system. So this would be providing trainers for healthcare providers. So it's kind of the brother to cluster 4, if you will, but it's really focused on the healthcare system. Ensuring access or ensuring local clinic staff are on board with telehealth as an alternative platform would be an example of something that was sitting in cluster 6. So that was a lot. We'll go to the next one though. So this one, here are the results to the rating step. So again, we have 70 little dots on this diagram. The colors of the dots actually correspond to those clusters that I just described. But the x-axis, so the horizontal axis down here, is impact. And so this is how impactful each of those suggestions might have been rated by our cluster. So it's the average impact of each of those ideas. And then on the y-axis is the average feasibility. So how our respondents rated the feasibility of each of the potential intervention or potential approaches. Can you go to the next slide? Does it create a little box? Yes. So this little red box here is called the go zone. And that really is the great way to kind of distinguish what are some potential approaches to providing telehealth in North Central Washington that are both rated as high impact, potentially, and relatively feasible compared to some other ones. So, you know, the ones on the far left corner, that quadrant, are going to be things that are a lot harder to change or might not have an enormous impact either. So we really want to focus on that go zone, that northeast quadrant, and look at different statements within that quadrant. Next slide. So here's just some statements, and this is all of the statements that exist in that quadrant. So I'm just going to maybe pick a couple and cherry pick a couple, but I'm going to let y'all read through these. We only had one from cluster 1 and cluster 2, and then 2 from cluster 3. A lot of them were from other clusters. So cluster 4, remember, was educating the community about telehealth. And so these are ideas from cluster 4 that were rated as having a really high impact and a really high feasibility. So these are utilize outreach workers to bring resources to places like orchards or migrant camps, provide community training, educate community members that telehealth is easy and reliable, and just providing that community education. So here, and then the next slide, it has some more. We could switch really quick. So cluster 5 had 1, but then cluster 6 was healthcare system engagement and delivery. So cluster 4 and 6 are really the 2 that were just the meat of them. Were sitting there in the go zone. And so cluster 6 include things like engaging clinics and providers on overcoming barriers to implementing telehealth services, providing affordable platforms for people to use, and for training local healthcare providers, for example. So that, I know I kind of got excited and started talking fast toward the end. And so we could switch between these slides if y'all want, and provide, I think this is within your packet to provide, because I think, Susan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the end of my little slides. Then we move on to secondary data analysis.
There's a hand raised, Penny.
Sure, Penny.
So I have one concern, and that is knowing your data. So earlier you were like, hey, I don't know why they're accessing the ER, and why they're saying, if they are saying that they are the more wealthy in this census, why are they accessing the ER? And then do they need a different way to access telehealth because they're saying that they want to use their phone? And I think it's important that you know, because you gave some reasoning of why you thought that would be. And each time you said your reasoning, my mind went somewhere totally different. I'm thinking, of course they're accessing the ER, they're working all week. Of course they're using their phone to do it because they're working and they're able to use their phone while they're working to access their doctor's appointment. Everything made perfect sense to me of why they were answering the way they were answering. And so then when your why to your solution is to go out to that migrant camp and to give them data centers and those kinds of solutions, it concerns me that you don't have the actual reasons to why they answered the way they did. And that goes back to that mapping that was talked about earlier. I guess that's just a concern.
To be clear, the end user survey is completely separate from GCM. Those who participated in that did not participate in the GCM. The GCM was focused on organizations. Yeah, and so yes. Just
Okay.
Thank you.
I also want to add that the suggestions that were generated from GCM are not they're not necessarily our recommendations. These were suggestions from folks in North Central Washington that, we just compiled and put in the basket of ideas.
I'm sorry, it's just been a really big concern, especially in Grant County, that our BIPOC population is not being represented as well as it should be, because we're not seeing it like at our FISPERT meetings and different, and like the survey, that survey we have a lot more Hispanic than we do Caucasian. Where are they accounted for? Because that survey does not negate that, and it's just a concern. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Right, no, yeah, that's a very valid concern. And so we tried to also speak with organizations who primarily served those populations to also try to capture that, because there's always limitations with an online survey as well, especially for accessing those populations.
Well, and this is Nancy Spurgeon, and I would add to that just a very small example too, in that I'm teaching courses at the college through what's called an IBEST model. And so all of the students in this class are Spanish speaking, learning the content through ELL, right? And when we first had to go online, everyone wanted to use their phone because they knew how.
Right.
They didn't know how to use the keyboard, right? But they knew how to use their phone. So I think there's all of those pieces to take into that. So thank you, Penny, for bringing that up.
John?
Right. There was a note in the chat box that said the GCM participants did not see any of the survey results. No, they were completely, in fact, I think they were happening concurrently.
Yeah, and I think my comment, maybe even going with Penny's, is sometimes like maybe, you know, thinking of it again, it would have almost been nice for them to see it when they did the GCM, because you can see kind of sometimes at the community leader and community organization level wise, how that doesn't always link up to what the respondents or the participants are saying. Because I see kind of like, Penny, I do agree with you. When I was seeing the respondents, the kiosks didn't really come to as much of as an importance, but like a lot of the conversations we've had over the last few months, it seemed like it was important. So it's interesting to see that almost, I don't know the best way to say it, but disconnection between sometimes us who are looking at providing the service and the direct respondents.
Penny, do you have another question, or did you just not lower your hand?
Oh, sorry.
That's fine. I just want to make sure. And to be clear, when I say something's interesting in the survey results, I'm just pointing out issues of things to think through and how it might impact how you respond, versus not saying it's significant or anything else, just pointing out some issues to think through on what might limit the responses that we get. But I'm going to continue on, because one thing that we did also look at is secondary data, and I wanted to point that out because even though video is a preference, there's large portions of the region that cannot support that at this time. Looking at the data, many residents don't have a broadband internet subscription at all. So that limits strategies that would reach or target those locations, but this access varies highly by location. And about the finest we can get it from a census level perspective is a zip code, to kind of look at variations across zip code. Some, although the percentage is small, it's important to point out that some don't have access to any computer or even a cell phone. And we should also point out that cell phone data plans really greatly vary by the region too, and the methods that they could support. Obviously, you know, a subset of the population are non-English speakers, a pretty high subset in many, many areas. And lack of insurance might be an issue for some residents in terms of accessing this care. We wanted to provide a little bit of the mapping. We use policy map and kind of map the census data just to show what this looks like. There are some zip codes that over 50% of households do not have access to broadband. That's extremely high. Okanagan seemed to have higher percentages, actually not seem, they did have higher percentages of the population who did not have access to any form of broadband. But access is very variable. It also varies by income and race. So we know that the Spanish speaking population also are less likely to have broadband internet. They're less likely to have access to the equipment necessary for those services. And just reinforces findings from other methods that broadband internet access is an issue, which you already clearly know. But seeing it geographically might be helpful. The other issue is even where we have internet access, speed and reliability is very low for a lot of the region. We use the results from the Washington State broadband map. Now, obviously they can't map everybody. It's dependent on you logging in and doing the task, but this still tells us a lot about what internet services there are. If you look up FCC, looks like the region has a lot of access to broadband because of the way FCC defines that. I wanted to do a map with an overlay, but it came out really murky. So it didn't really quite work. But when we look at these speeds, the local data suggests that for many areas, this will definitely not support video to video internet, which was the preference in the survey. There's a lot of low speeds. There's a lot of reds and medium speeds. The faces are all blocking so I can see, but like if you, we did an interview with one public utility district, and when we talked about video to video services, they said you would at least need this range in the middle here, or sorry, in medium category. They estimated 50, right? And so if you think about that, estimating 50 for video to video telephone telehealth strategies, many in the region do not have speeds that would support that type of strategy. So it becomes, broadband access is significant. Even those who have access, there's a lot of really low speeds. Again, this is geographically, this varies as well. There are some greens here and yellow, but for some of these strategies, if they don't have green, it's not going to be very supportive of the strategies. So broadband access obviously varies by household income, so we kind of looked into that a little bit. There's a high proportion of the population, that doesn't have access again, and this just varies by income as we would suspect. Based on this, I'm going to go over some of the recommendations that we have. These are only potential tentative recommendations based on the data that we are seeing. We will rely on your knowledge of the area to help craft further recommendations. This is based only on the community data so far. So key findings, obviously broadband access and reliability is a key issue, and speed is a real big issue for this region. It's identified as a big issue across all regions. Christina, what's up?
Oh, I just wanted to let you know that Wendy had put in the chat that we're almost out of time. So I'm wondering if you might want to just skip ahead to the overall recommendations.
Okay, let me do that. So recommendations, you're probably already doing this, but participating in coordinated efforts for broadband access is very much needed. Might participate with the local broadband action teams, connect with the state broadband office. Having a project where you've already looked into telehealth access and maybe using that to garner more grant funds could make your grant application very enticing in that area. We're going to focus on some of the recommendations that we have. We have to get over this high level of distrust in telehealth care technology, and we have to make the public aware of it. So some sort of coordinated education campaign that deals with knowledge of whatever strategies are pursued, but also builds trust in the system itself is going to be essential. And there were community organizations that we interviewed that said they were interested in helping with that process if they could, especially for the population that they serve. So video is most preferred, but based on this, other strategies are going to have to be used. Health stations, especially because of the lack of access to broadband in the region, are probably going to be necessary. They are going to be necessary if this is done quickly. Potentially partnering with local schools and libraries might be a way to do this, an environment that's considered pretty safe and trusted and already has access to high-speed internet. Other states have used a school-based model. You could start local and build up pretty successfully, probably scale up, but the libraries might have resources in this as well. Something to think about. I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to overall, obviously telehealth distrust of telehealth is a barrier to uptake. Partnering with local organizations to reach diverse communities, having trust messengers to help build support and trust for the systems in place. Some potential first steps to building telehealth care, or doing a telehealth care build out, more so than it's already been done, is maybe focusing on the specialty services that are needed, and educating on those, such as providing, doing this for mental and behavioral health, and building a system for that, using some sort of kiosk or station model in those areas that don't have access to broadband might be a way to go and build trust in the system while other elements are being built out. Again, partnering with agencies to help with this. Pastero Brewster has a community resource center that is doing this model. It could be used as a model to help do this in the future. They rent out space to providers in order to provide mental and emotional, or behavioral and emotional health care, meet those needs. And they gave us some information on the costs and stuff that they've needed to do this to make it successful, though they've had to reach out and broaden their horizons a bit so they could support it. So they're now providing services for the Okanagan courts and other services to make sure that they continue in the future. But given the region, given what we're seeing, some sort of station is going to be needed to reach most of the population. And especially for some populations, the high amount of distrust, Pasteros Brewster has spent a long time building trust, especially with the Hispanic community, in order to get them to use those services. So some sort of prolonged way of doing that is going to be necessary. And that was quicker than I intended, sorry. So questions and discussion. And again, these are just potential based on the community data. So your expertise in the region and in this area is going to be beneficial and super important as we go out. And whether a pilot test building out for a specialty type care like mental health is the route to go, or some other model. Some of the essential things coming out of this, though, is the distrust in these sort of systems and how we combat that. Go ahead, Penny.
Do we have any change on what the payout is? Because I know that one of the issues to getting the PCPs to participate is what their payback has been, since it is smaller than an actual visit. And I just don't think that's right. I am getting more out of my telehealth visits than I do in person, because it is hard to get in, especially for somebody that has critical illness like myself. So what's going on as far as payment for service? Do you know?
And there's a lot, there are some things going on that would be out of our control, but and we can talk a little bit more because that's a little bit outside of this part. But I get where you're going, and it is definitely connected. I will just ask the board members that right now, do you have any comments or feedback based on what you saw today? I'll be working with both WSU and Ingenium to bring something to you next month. So if there is something that you heard today versus what you heard last, or compared to what you heard last week, and you're interested in seeing more next month, we have only 2 minutes. You can speak up now, or I would open up that you can send me information or send me an email, and we can either talk or you can send it in an email.
I also wanted to remind everyone that in the chat are links to all of the items that we have been talking about today. So before we do get off, I encourage you to jump on there and download anything or click on anything that you want to research further. And I do want to thank Christina, Janessa, and Susan for your work today, and Wendy. I will go ahead and we have a comment in the chat.
Yeah, Molly, as you're reading the chat, as Wendy said, this is kind of like a part two of a 3-part series. So next meeting is when we go look and bring together the discussions of engineering and WSU, and really look ourselves how the two come together to really identify some key potential solutions moving forward.
And this was a great presentation. So you want to sit down and look at the mapping and really get your thoughts together. And then next month we'll address it again. But at this time, I will be adjourning the meeting and thank everyone for their participation. It was a great meeting and a lot of information, and looking forward to next month. We do have some events coming up as well, so I'll be talking to you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you all.